If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. Dateline October 14, 1918. A spark from a passing train, the parched landscape and dry gusty winds combined to produce Minnesota's worst wildfire outbreak in state history. On October 10, 1918, a passing train spark ignited a fire near Cloquet that smoldered for a few days. Northeast Minnesota at the time was experiencing its driest season in 48 years, according to the U.S. Weather Bureau's official in charge, H.W. Richardson, so when gusty and dry southwest winds developed, the fire grew and spread rapidly. The peak wind measured by the Weather Bureau was 76 miles per hour at 5:52 p.m., with a 5-minute wind speed of 65 miles per hour. News of the oncoming fire did not reach Duluth until late afternoon on the 12th, when news of the fire devouring the small town of Brookston arrived. The fire entered Duluth at the Woodland neighborhood at about 6 p.m. In total, 1,000 people lost their lives in the fire. The hardest hit areas were Moose Lake, Cloquet, and Kettle River. 38 communities were destroyed, 250,000 acres were burned, and $73 million, over $1 billion in today's economy, in property damage was suffered. There was not just a single fire, there were numerous fires spread through northeastern Minnesota, as can be seen by the red-colored areas in the map below. Fully 15,000 square miles of forests and country dotted with villages and towns, farmers and settlers, have been swept by the most deadly and destructive forest fire in the history of the state of Minnesota, the flames. Starting with the high wind storm that swept this part of the state, commencing Saturday evening. Cloquet is swept bare, while Moose Lake is left in ruins with scarcely a thing to show a town was there. Brookston was practically destroyed. Settlers were driven from the vicinity of Cass Lake and for miles in surrounding country. Over 9,000 refugees are estimated in Duluth. One of the most spectacular escapes from the terrible Holocaust, which swept a large area west of Duluth, destroying thousands of acres of timber, towns, and villages, with an estimated loss of 1,000 lives. Saturday afternoon and evening was that of Miss Margaret McGee of Bemidji, who has been teaching in the Moose Lake schools, and which town was wiped completely off the map, every shred of structure being effaced, with the exception of the brick school building, which miraculously escaped. Moose Lake swept clean. The terrible fire was raging to the west of Moose Lake, which was a town of between 800 and 900 inhabitants. Not a man was in the town as they were fighting the sweeping flames from the west toward the doomed town. It was between 7:30 and 8 o'clock that the inhabitants of the town were seeking every avenue of escape and were fleeing to the lake and around it in hopes of escaping. The panic was assuming a frightful aspect, with huge clouds of smoke being driven by a high wind enveloping the terrified inhabitants. Suddenly the wind veered around from the northeast without the slightest warning and enveloped the struggling and crazed humans trying to escape. With 4 other companions, Mississippi McGee fled to the lake and out onto a short pier. There they fought for safety by keeping the wood wet. They were forced to stand in the lake and crouch in their desperate battle for over 4 hours. Scores of mobiles rushed hither and thither, rescuing the helpless and homeless people. One car picked up Miss McGee and her friends. A young man jumped on the running board of the car and away they dashed through dense smoke and flames. Another car rammed the speeding car and broke the young man's legs. On they sped for Barn Uni, through masses of flames, flying embers, and burning brands, the scenes beggaring description. Barnum was reached between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning, where a train on the Northern PA was boarded for Minneapolis, the train carrying scores of burned and injured victims. About 50 were taken in ambulances from the train in St. Paul. Miss McGee boarded a train at St. Paul for Bemidji, arriving without a bit of baggage. And with only what she had on in the way of belongings. Scenes beyond description. The scenes at Moose Lake are beyond description. Trucks were pressed into service to haul away the dead piled high, bodies were everywhere. Families were cut off * why the deadly flames. Men fighting the fire were overcome and dug holes in the ground, covering themselves with earth while the hot flames passed over them. One woman and her family of 12 were burned where they lived. Autos were abandoned and left to explode in the hot area. Hundreds were run into the lake and saved. Miss McGee came through her terrible ordeal unperturbed, yet hardly realizing now what she faced in that dash through flying debris, fire, and past dead and dying, her experience in the Jake with flaming brands sweeping overhead to start other conflagrations around the lake. Other tragedies. A report comes from Brockton of a man and family madly dashing in an effort to escape from the flames. Through dense smoke, the car went into a ditch and the wife W.M. thrown through the windshield and her neck broken. Another man in a car with his family dashed into a big tree and all were killed. Stories of heroism often parallel stories of tragedy. Woman faints, falls upon stove, face burned while working over her cook stove. Saturday morning about 11 o'clock, Mrs. Walter Helmer fainted and fell on the hot * stove, burning the side of her face badly.